thank you for your time. You have written extensively over the years about the cost of corruption. Let's start with your summary of the cost in as far as the levers of the economy are concerned, mainly through state-owned entities. What is the true cost, and are we any closer to understanding the full cost of having these entities that are meant to be developmental in nature corrupted in the way that has happened in the last 15 or so years?
Well, it's getting increasingly clear the extent in rand value that we're looking at an amount that's nearly equivalent to our GDP. But that is only partly the cost. The more significant cost is going to be the long-run macroeconomic and societal cost. And that we're seeing around us already. The outcomes, the societal outcomes, the instability, the lack of trust, and the erosion in our institutions and the waning of our democracy are outcomes of the pervasiveness of corruption. It's fairly typical from examples we see around the world that countries that experience a rapid and expanding growth of corruption across all spheres of government, which is effectively what we have here, never achieve their economic potential. They remain stagnant, the institutions decline, and the society stagnates. And as a result, accordingly, we have, which is one of the reasons why we so desperately need additional support for our society, welfare support for our society, is an outcome of corruption. We're looking at least 2 lost generations as a result of the corruption that is so pervasive.
Wow, that is actually scary to even think about, because I imagine that the consequences will outlive the current generation of quote-unquote leaders that oversaw this corruption, but also a society that wasn't able to respond adequately to that corruption. It will outlive this particular generation and possibly set us on a dangerous path.
Potentially, yes. We saw the events of what can happen if political infighting spills over into societal dissatisfaction. We saw that in July. And there is the likelihood that will be repeated sometime in the future, and possibly at a much greater scale, as a result of the deprivation that faces the vast majority of our population, who are really at the receiving end of corruption. Corruption might be the stealing of taxpayers' money, but it's the poor that are withheld the societal services and goods that they are entitled to as members of society. And as a result, the corruption effectively steals money from those with money, but it redistributes poverty.
In fact, while you're talking about that, I think maybe let's zoom in a little bit on the impact on state-owned entities once again. My own thinking that in rands and cents, for example, you should be able to calculate, for instance, with Eskom, because you can easily demonstrate that here we were trying to build a power station to respond to the needs of everyone, including the poor and underdeveloped areas in the form of Medupi and Kusile. But because the priority was the feeding trough of corruption, here we are, this one power station is less than 5 years old, but it's beset with problems. The other one, the costs have run into many, many more billions than could have happened. And another one that I suppose I could give as an example is around PRASA, for example, that had we not prioritized that the connected, now is our time to eat, there would be modern trains, safe trains that run on time for people in Naledi, in Zola, to be able to hop on a train and get into the city center with little problems. Am I on the right track in terms of what is calculable and demonstrable by way of what it has cost ordinary South Africans?
Yes, corruption is naturally linked to deindustrialization. And it sets the country in a very poor path for future growth, because not only are you dealing with all the inefficiencies associated with the outcomes of these corrupt procurement and the inferior service and goods that's then provided, it also limits the ability both of the state and the private sector to correct those inefficiencies in the future. So the private sector are less likely to invest in the economy because there's fears about the safety of that capital and the efficiency of the investment. And likewise, government eventually will not have enough capital available to rectify the problem created by corruption. So corruption eventually over time, especially at the scale we've seen in South Africa, means that it erodes all factors and all functions of the state, both institutionally, but then also as a provider for the goods and services needed by society.
But has the penny dropped, though, Prof. Gossel, in terms of wider societal understanding of what the true cost is and how we need to do a 180-degree turn on this issue of corruption? Just watching in recent months from what has been happening at State Capture Commission of Inquiry, for example, how the President has been talking, how various leaders of various sectors of society have been talking, from business, the EOHs of this world, some of whose employees were implicated in some of that corruption, coming to say, actually, we're turning things around. The auditing professions saying we're introspecting, we're turning things around, strengthening of institutions. Does that give us hope, a glimmer of hope, or are we to remain hopeless? Because while all of that has been happening, PPE corruption has been happening, digital vibes, etc., etc.
Well, it's very difficult to say because we don't yet know the effect that this realization is having on the electoral outcomes of society. So whereas historically most people in society who lost faith in particularly the ANC part of the government merely stopped voting rather than voted for an opposition party. Whether that carries on then increasingly, or we're likely to see over time, is the number of people who stop voting increases. We don't actually see a change in government. And it's quite clear from the pronouncements both of the President of the Zondo Commission and even recently in the public pronouncements coming out from his weekly newsletters and so on, that the government doesn't fully understand the extent of the erosion in trust that has been experienced. We see it, for example, it's showing up in the Afrobarometer data. The ANC has reached a point in its developmental cycle where it's attained the level of absolute doubt. There is no faith in its moral, ethical, or operational ability, let alone its strategic ability. And this increasingly is feeding through into the frustration in the public. But whether that translates into a vote change will be the clear indicator of the extent to which South Africa's democracy is maturing or whether it's still at an immature stage.
All right, thank you for your insights and your time here on All Angles. That is Professor Sean Gossel from the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business, weighing in on our focus on corruption and its impact on society. They're making a number of important points about the impact that corruption has had on our society.